Child is a developing being, and by development we refer to a continuous process of change that occurs lifelong, leading to maturation. This is important during the early age because this is a crucial period of development. No understanding of the pathology, especially the child and adolescent mental pathology, can be done without a proper understanding and knowledge of the normal development. And in many times, pathology means deviation from the standard, typical development. Our current knowledge about development comes from evidence-based practices like experiences, observations that can be replicated. However, sometimes we rely on theoretical inputs, some theories that need yet to be proven, but that are very relevant to our practice. Development is a lifelong process with a lot of interaction with environment, with other objects, with other persons, and it's a dynamic, always changing process. So we can have many differences between two individuals, even though belonging to the same group, or between groups belonging to different cultures, different languages, different religions. And this is also to be taken into consideration when we evaluate development. Development is the result of an interplay between nature and nurture. Nature is all the inborn factors like genetic, neurological, hormonal, immunological factors, but also some other factors that we will develop later like temperament or intelligence. By nurture, we refer to all the environmental factors that interfere with development, starting with the physical factors during the birth, delivery, what we call the perinatal factors, but also toxins, microbes, nutritional factors, and also to all the experiences that we have with objects and people, our interactions, the parenting style of our parents, the education that we receive, all these, of course, contribute to development. Between nature and nurture, there's a connection, there's an interplay that can be seen through some complex factors referred to as, for example, epigenetics. This is the influence of environment of the genome, but also some factors that influence the neurological maturation, like synaptogenesis or like the neuroplasticity, and also all the factors that interfere with our behaviors that we learn, like shaping, like conditioning. And these connections lead to the development that we see. Before going any further into development, we have to remind some basic principles for development. The first one is variability, and here variability is over time. Whether we consider development as a continuous process or a discontinuous process, meaning that development in this approach is considered as different phases separated by periods of discontinuity, but still in both approaches, all the authors are agreeing on the fact that development is never occurring at the same speed, and that speed changes and tempo changes over periods of time, with periods of quick development to quick acquisitions of certain, for example, acquisitions, but also periods of regression, of slowness, or of plateau. This is the first principle. The second principle is the principle of the critical phases of development or critical periods of development. This refers to periods during which we have to acquire certain acquisitions of development, or we wouldn't have these acquisitions develop at the best way. For example, language is intended to be acquired during the 5 first years of life. If it appears later, it can be developed, but it's never going to be the same efficiency of language that we would have if language appeared during the first 5 years of life. The other principles of development are differentiation and succession. Differentiation refers to the fact that acquisition and development go from the less differentiated, for example, reflexes, to the more differentiated, for example, intentional movements. Succession means that acquisitions or developmental milestones go following a very specific pattern of succession. For example, the cephalocaudal developmental law for motor development means that we first control motricity of the neck, the head, the cephalic part of the body, and then we go controlling the bottom, the lower part of the body. The same thing can be said, for example, regarding the succession of development of language. We have first to learn babbling, and then first words, and then sentences. We have to remind at last that a human being is characterized by a prolonged state of dependency on caregiver, and this is important to consider when we talk about development. Development can be divided in different periods or different domains. By periods, we refer to 4 major periods of development regarding the age that we are interested to. The first one is infancy from 0 to 2 years. The second one is toddlerhood from 3 to 5. Then comes childhood or school age from 6 to 11. And then adolescence from 11 to 18. By domains, we divide development into at least 2 major domains: the cognitive or intellectual development and the social-emotional development. Motor development and language development are usually connected to cognitive or intellectual development. The first domain of intelligence that we are going to address is the cognitive development. And here we have first to see the theory of Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget is a psychologist from Switzerland who developed in the 1960s an important theory of the development of intelligence based on his own observations of the development of his son and his grandchildren. He developed a view of intelligence that is discontinuous, meaning consisting in different phases, and these phases, which are 4 in Jean Piaget's theory, can be summarized as follows. The first one goes from 0 to 2 during infancy and is called the sensory-motor phase of intelligence. During this phase, the infant will develop its perception and will have progressively an internal representation of object, meaning that he is not necessarily supposed to see objects or to hear objects to know that they are there. Then we go to the phase of the pre-operational intelligence, from 2 to 6. In this phase, we have the emergence of the symbolic thought through, for example, the symbolic play, the pretend play. The child pretends he is, for example, doing the job of a doctor, for example, or that he is cooking. Here, there is an importance for imitation, and the thought is still considered as egocentric, meaning that the child is considering his own point of view as the unique point of view that is available and that is possible. And then we go to the concrete operational phase of intelligence from 6 to 11, which is the third phase of intelligence, during which the child will acquire a logical thought with the importance, for example, of the concepts of conservation, for example, of the length, of the weight, of the color. These concepts are independent, for example, from the context and can be, for example, taken from one context to another, and this is what allows, for example, learning at school. And then from 11 to 18, we have the phase of the formal intelligence. The formal intelligence is characterized by the ability of the thinking in an abstract way without needing the concrete supports that we needed in the previous phase. And in this phase, we have the possibility of leading a deductive thinking that is only based on the manipulation of, mind concepts. I mean, completely cognitive and intellectual concepts without the concrete input of the objects themselves. Many other approaches try to connect the development of the intelligence to the development of the brain. Neurosciences here consider the brain as a complex system of functional areas Each area is considered as specialized in a specific function. The first to be developed are, of course, the sensory and the motor areas. The sensory areas are, for example, the occipital area in the brain dedicated to the vision, or the temporal area dedicated to audition. We have to connect them, and this is called the intersensory integration, or to connect the motor and the sensory areas. And this leads, at the end, to the central coherence, meaning the ability of connecting different sources of stimulation to have a coherent image of what we are perceiving. At the same time, the attention and many other high functions of the brain are developing. Attention, for example, is built on different networks in the brain, each dedicated to a specific type of attention, and attention is crucial for intelligence. At the end, some of the functions appear to organize our thought and our actions. These are called the executive functions, located usually in the frontal lobe or the frontal cortex, thus to be developed in the cognitive development. And here we refer to functions such as, for example, self-regulation, the ability, for example, to organize ourselves, to stop from doing something in order to switch to another task, or, for example, to do priorities in our functioning. For the development of language, we have three phases. The first phase is called the pre-linguistic phase, ranging from 1 month to 18 months. During this phase, we will see the precursors of language, what is appearing before language. First, we have the production of the phonemes, the sounds of the language, and this can be seen through the cooing seen the first 2 months, and then the babbling. It's important to see also the non-linguistic precursors of language. The most important ones are the joint attention, the ability to share its attention with another person, to be seen during the first 3 months, and the pointing to an object with the finger, with the index, to seen within the first year. The second phase for the development of language is the emergence of language, with the appearance of the first meaningful words around 12 months on average, but the period can range from 9 to 18 months. Usually we see an explosion of language, with on average 5 words in 12 months to 200 words in 24 months, 2 years. Usually it is very normal in this period that the child uses what we call the baby talk, a very simplified lexicon and a very simplified syntax, leading to what we call the hollow phrases, sentences without appropriate syntax and grammar, and also the use of a telegraphic speech. Then the third phase is characterized by the appearance of the sentences, and here we call it the language maturation from 18 to 36 months on average. And here we will see the appearance of a correct use of syntax and grammar that can be seen, for example, through the correct use of pronouns, the you, me, he, and so forth. Psychomotor development is consisting in many functions, and not all of them can be detailed here because of time. We will focus on gross motor, fine motor, and some other important steps in the psychomotor development. For the gross motor development, we see in the neonate only neonatal reflexes, which are manifestation of reflective and automatic motricity, with hypertonus in the periphery and hypotonus on the axis of the body. Then the infant will be able to sit around 8 months on average, to crawl on 9 to 10 months on average, which is not an obligation, and the first steps are usually seen around 12 months. From that period on, the baby will be able to improve the posture and the general coordination of the movements. For the fine motor development, we will insist only on the grasping ability, the ability to manipulate and take things in the hand. And this is only possible after the grasping reflex disappears at 3 to 5 months. Then the baby will be able to grasp things with the internal part of the hand, the ulnar grasp, around 5 months, and then the use of the pincer, the thumb and the index at the first year. Then, the development of a better coordination between the two eyes, binocular, the two hands, and the eye and the hand will improve this ability. Laterality is stable after 6 years on average, and in 90% of kids is the right hand and the right leg, the right eye dominance. Other important motor milestones are the control of the bladder and the bowel, usually seen around the second and the third year, a normal period of ambulation and hyperactivity that is not necessarily pathological between the second and the fifth year of life, and the body image is to be monitored, the ability to represent mentally her or his own body, and the picture, the draw person ability, is an important step to locate around the fourth year of life. As for the social emotional development, we have many aspects to consider. First of them is temperament, and temperament is defined by the biological predisposition to a certain specific patterns of behavior and interaction. And by biological we mean genetic, neurological, hormonal, immunological factors, and so forth. This temperament will further influence the interaction between the parent and the child, which is important for the shaping of the personality. Based on experiences and observations, we have 3 types of temperament: the difficult, 20%, the easy, 40%, and the slow to warm up, 17% on average. Attachment is a very interesting way to describe the relationships that are created between the child and the persons around the child. It has been established that there's an innate need in a human infant to have a privileged and differentiated attachment with the caregiver, usually called the attachment figure. The further development of the child will depend on a balance between the exploring behavior and the security that is needed within the attachment figure. At 24 months, it is possible to assess this attachment through a specific paradigm called the strange situation, consisting in a sequence of separations and reunions between the mother and the child in the presence of a stranger. 60% of children will have secure attachment. 40% will have an insecure attachment, which is possibly the bed for further psychosocial problems. Psychoanalysis or psychodynamic approach is a theoretical framework that is very useful to understand child's emotional development, seen here as the outcome of maturating unconscious conflicts between the child's secret desires, unconscious desires, and the constraints of reality. Sigmund Freud, father of psychoanalysis, proposes different phases to describe this development of personality. First, the oral phase from 0 to 1 year, which is characterized on the management of immediate satisfaction of desires. The anal phase from 1 to 3 years, characterized by the ability to control and regulate ourselves. And then the Oedipal phase, characterized between 3 to 6 years by unstable affective state, where the child tries to find love and find interest in his relations with the persons from the other gender or the other generation, mainly here his own parents. Then the child goes into a phase of latency, where the affective conflicts are a little bit quieter, until adolescence, where these movements, this unconscious movement, come again to an important turmoil. In the same psychodynamic framework, another major author, René Spitz, left an important legacy, and here the personality is seen through 3 important organizing principles to locate in time. The first one is the first social smile, important to be seen in the first 2 months, and then the stranger's anxiety, the anxiety and the fear from a stranger person, which is important to see and which is normal around the 8 months age. Then the period of the obstination, opposition, and the appearance of the no as the ability to be in a different point of view. And this is an important step in the development of personality to see around the first 18 months. Spitz also left another legacy through some empirical research that have shown that severe emotional deprivation in infancy, for example, a child that is separated from mother, or that is living with a depressed mother, or a mother that has got some difficulties in interaction with the child, then the child will be severely impaired in his intellectual and emotional development. In the psychosocial model as proposed by Erickson, development is a succession and a transition between different periods of development according to the most important concern at every specific age. For example, between birth and 1 year, trust is the most important concern. Between 1 and 3, autonomy becomes the most important concern and most important topic in development. At adolescence, this becomes identity, for example. The following milestones come from different empirical researches on social and emotional development. Empathy is an important milestone to be seen between 12 and 18 months, and it relates to the ability to reflect another person's emotions. Between 2 and 4 years of age, there's a normal period of poor control of emotional reactivity, and in this age it is quite normal to see, for example, as a result of this poor control, some agitation, aggression, temper tantrums, or opposition. From 4 years of age, we start to see the premises of theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to have another point of view of another person's in terms of other thoughts or other feelings. At school age, the child starts to have a strong moral development and assessing things in terms of what is good and what is bad. At the same time, the child acquires a better self-control and also is able to have some stereotyped way of thinking regarding, for example, gender and gender roles. At adolescence, identity becomes a major concern, and it is quite normal at this age to see identity concerns translated clinically by some fluctuant self-esteem. We have to say a few words about the influence of culture. Even though all what we have stated so far about development is considered as universally relevant, we need always to adjust our findings to the cultural context. For example, language development can be different in a different linguistic context, for example, in bilingualist context, for example. The same thing can be said also for the education, schooling, and their influence on the cognitive and intellectual development. So we need always to remind the importance of adjusting the developmental assessments and evaluation to the cultural context. And this fact is called the validation, the cross-cultural validation of the tools that we use to monitor and assess development, which is a necessity to any kind of developmental assessment. So, in summary, we can insist on the following statements. First, understanding of normal development milestones is crucial to understand psychopathology. Second, division of development into different domains and ages and periods is only didactic. In reality, these processes and ages are highly interconnected. Third, normality in development relies on statistic and theoretical accounts and needs always to be adjusted to the context where the development is observed or described.